That's on. That's on. Okay. As far as I know, everything is on and working properly. Shabbat shalom to everybody. And y'all need to say shalom to everybody out in telephone land.
Shalom.
All right.
Wish y'all were here.
Goodness gracious, are y'all about half asleep out there in telephone land?
No.
Oh, well, say shalom one more time.
Shalom.
Bye, shalom.
Somebody work out.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Seeing as how this is Shemini Atzareh, and I guess y'all realize that means, oh, here's my note. Shemini comes from Shemineh, which means it means 8, but not the number 8. Is that too loud? But not the number 8, but it means as.
Turned it off. Now we don't.
It's off. There you
Okay.
go.
I won't touch it no more. Okay, but it means a surplus above 7, a surplus above completion. And then I gave you the word Atzareh, which is number 6116. The root is 6113. And the 6116 does mean an assembly, especially on a festival or a holy day, but the root word, 6113, means to enclose. That is, to surround, to separate from common ground by a fence. To include, as to in a surrounding, to encompass, to cover. Okay? It's kind of like after Adam and Eve sinned, but they didn't know they were naked. Meaning they did not know that they needed a covering. We have to have a covering of Yahweh, right? They went and tried to make them out of fig leaves. They tried to make their own covering, right? Instead of seeking the covering. Anyway, on this 8th day, there's a lot of different readings today. We're going to go through it and we're going to finish the book of Deuteronomy today. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then next Shabbat, we're going to have some special teaching, and I think next Shabbat we'll probably start the book of Romans. Because that's kind of a free day if anybody wants to learn about the book of Romans. Kind of an interesting book, you know. And but today, beginning in Deuteronomy 31:1 through 34:12, and 33:1 through 34:12. What did I do? Did I get mixed up?
I think you said 31:1, and I thought we did 32 last week.
We did?
We finished
Oh, okay.
the whole
We did the whole Megillah.
Megillah.
Okay.
Today we will do the whole Megillah.
Okay. So, beginning in, I guess I better get over there. In Deuteronomy 33. Did y'all get anything out of Deuteronomy 32 last week?
Good.
Isn't that an interesting song? Especially when you think about they're going to be singing that song, according to the book of Revelation, chapter 15, they're going to sing the song of Moses. And they call it the Song of the Lamb. Isn't that amazing? I wonder if anybody recognizes that the Song of Moshe, you know, is the Torah, and the Song of the Lamb, and the Torah teaches about the Lamb. Isn't that a neat thing? It's funny how many people think they know the Mashiach, and yet the only thing they really know is what somebody else told them. And he says, in that last day, somebody's going to come to him and say, we did this and that. He's going to say, what? Depart from me. I never knew you, you who practice lawlessness, or you who transgress the Torah. You know, if we all would begin to remember that the word sin means what? Transgression of the Torah, correct? So every time we start talking about sin, why don't we use the phrase transgression of the Torah? And then somebody would say, what are you talking about? Transgression of the instructions that Yahweh has given us. When you disobey him, isn't that sin? Every preacher in the world is out there preaching we're supposed to obey God. Isn't that what they say? God. You know. They really draw it. Okay. And yet, if we try to, They look at us like we're crazy. Okay. Deuteronomy 33, verse 1. Y'all, I'm a little bit woozy from that hot sauce. Woo! That's good stuff, wasn't it? Daryl did it.
Was that flippers? What?
Do what?
What verse?
Was that flip sauce?
Yeah, Mr. Flip Sauce.
Yeah, Mr. Flipsaw. Mr. Flips. Okay. Hey, all y'all out there in telephone land, I'm going to mute you.
Okay. See what you did, Ken.
Well, we won't do it for a while. We'll see how everything goes, okay?
Yeah.
But in Deuteronomy chapter 33 and verse 1, these first 5 verses, if you'll notice them, they're for all the children of Israel, all the sons of Israel, okay? And it says, now this is the blessing with which Moshe, the man of Ha Elohim, the Creator, blessed the children of Israel before his death. Notice that this is a blessing. It's kind of hard for us to understand that sometime, but in reality what we realize is in all these verses he's telling us what's going to take place in the latter days. Isn't that a blessing to know what's going to take place? So he said, the blessing with which Moshe, the man of Elohim, blessed the children of Israel before his death, and he said, oh, I know, somebody's going to say, oh, wait a minute, this just applies to the children of Israel.
Yes.
Right? But who is that? Anybody who wants to be in the family. So in verse 2 he says, and he said, Yahweh came from Sinai and dawned on them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran, and he came with 10,000s of saints. From his right hand a fiery law for them. Yes, he loves the people. All his saints are in your hand. They sit down at your feet, receiving your words. Moses commanded a Torah for us, a heritage. Actually, that word heritage there means a possession of the congregation of Yaakov. And he was king in Yeshurun when the leaders of the people were gathered, all the tribes of Israel together. Of course, the word Sinai, the mountain, 55:14 is the word, is the number of the word. It means thorny. It's a mountain. And in case everybody hasn't figured this out, it's in Arabia. Right? It's not in the Sinai Peninsula. It's not in Egypt. Y'all ever notice how many times Yahweh said, to Moses, get them out of Egypt? They didn't stop off on the mountaintop in Egypt. The Sinai Peninsula has always been part of Egypt. He says he dawned. 22:24 is that word. V'sa'ara means to rise like the sun.
22:24.
22:24. V'sa'ara. He dawned. From Seir, 81:65. Seir, meaning hairy or shaggy. He came from what's from Seir, hairy or shaggy. It's the land of Edom. Remember the word, Esau, in Hebrew means hairy. Esau was a brother of Yaakov, right? He was hairy all over. But he was called Edom, which means red. But that was because of the red bean soup that he sold his birthright for. He shone forth. That's the number 33:13. That's shone forth. It means to shine or to bring light. 33:13. 33:13. He brought light from, and Mount Paran, of course, is the number 6290. It's a mountain in the desert of Arabia, meaning the place of caverns. And it's a mountain with caves in Arabia. Before we read on, go to 1 Kings chapter 19. 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 5 through 9. Now, in this chapter 19, Elijah is running from Jezebel. Y'all all remember the story where he did that, okay? And he's running from Jezebel. Verse 5 said, Then as he lay and slept under a broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, Arise, eat. Then he looked, and there by his head was a cake baked on coals and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of Yahweh came back the second time and touched him and said, Arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you. So he arose and ate and drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights as far as Horeb, the mountain of El. So he is down in the land of Midian, in Arabia, at this mountain. Verse 9, And there he went into a cave and spent the night in that place, and behold, the word of Yahweh came to him, and he said to him, What are you doing here, Elijah? Elijah is sleeping in a cave on Mount Horeb. Okay? That's the same place where Moshe received, okay, the word, the Torah, from Yahweh. It's the same place. If y'all haven't seen it, we have a video. It's called In Search of the Real Mount Sinai. And it's the story of two explorers who went down into Arabia and everything, looking and finding, and shows what they found. It's only about a 45-minute video. We've got it on DVD and we've got it on the video if anybody'd like to watch it if you haven't already seen it. It's very interesting. And it brings out a whole lot of things from what the scriptures actually say. And one of the first things that struck me about these two guys that went searching, one of them is supposed to be a believer. He's an ex-cop. And the other one is a Wall Street trader. and he makes a statement. He said, I wouldn't class myself as being religious, you know. I guess the only thing he really likes is money. But they decided to go looking for these places as an adventure. And he said one of the first things they noticed was how many times in Scripture that Yahweh told Moses to take the people out of Egypt. So he said, it's obvious you don't start looking for Mount Horeb in Egypt, so why could everybody kept saying it was Mount Sinai on the Sinai Peninsula, which is part of Egypt? And yet that's where all the scholars of the world say Mount Horeb is, right? And yet in reality there's not a single sliver of evidence anywhere ever has been that verifies that as the place where the children of Israel camped. So who said that was the place? Constantine's mother, Helena, said it was the place, and they built a shrine and a church and all kinds of stuff there, and for thousands of years people have been saying, that's the place. And yet there's not a single shred of evidence for that at all. And I say that so everybody can begin to realize we can't continue to believe something that somebody told us without checking out first with what the Scripture said. And it's real simple. The Scripture plainly says over in Galatians that it was the mountain where? In Arabia. You know, that's the book of Galatians. You know, that's a famous book. You know, everybody talks about, have you read Galatians? How come nobody ever knows that Galatians is the one that says the mountain of Horeb was in Arabia? And nobody believes, you know. Okay. Anyway, go back to Deuteronomy 33. All of these passages that he's talking about, he came with 10,000s of saints. Remember, he's talking about when he came up, you know, and he came up out of Egypt and he brought them into Arabia, and he came with 10,000s of the saints. You know, there was a lot more than that. It's a number that's not necessarily definitive. He had a fiery law for them. That word law there came a fiery law is the number 1881. It's the word doth. And it's a fiery set of instructions. Verse 3 says, yes, he loves the people. You reckon he gave them that law because he hated them? I mean, isn't that what people think? He gave them that law knowing they couldn't keep it and then killed them when they couldn't do it. That shows a lot of love, doesn't it? Go to the book of Jude. Y'all know where Jude is, right? That's over in the back of the book. Just before the end of everything. In chapter 1. in verse 14 and 15.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Yeah, it's about time you got here.
You were supposed to call me.
I forgot.
I knew you did.
That's why we're checking that again.
Oh, well, we're here, and we in Deuteronomy 33.
Oh, you already started without us, huh?
Well,
We're
sure.
gonna call it 15 minutes early. Not that matters, you know. But
Yeah, well,
I'm telling you, recording.
yeah, we're recording too.
Oh, goody.
But in
Tell me.
verse 14 and 15 of the book of Jude,
Okay, thank you.
now Enoch the seventh from Adam prophesied about these men also, saying, Behold, Yahweh comes with 10,000s of his saints. Now that's almost the same thing as what it says over there in Deuteronomy. But in verse 14 it says, to execute judgment on all, to convict all who are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have committed in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. If you replace the word ungodly with the word unrighteous, to execute judgment on all, to convict all who are unrighteous. Now remember, if righteousness is obedience to the Torah, then unrighteousness is disobedience to the Torah. So again, these people are all into sin or transgression of the Torah, which is disobedience. So the same thing here, and he's referencing, but now he's referencing that Enoch talked about these. Remember, Enoch was the one who walked with Yahweh for about 365 years, and then Scripture says he was not, for Yahweh took him. Because he had this testimony that he pleased Yahweh. And yet in the book of Hebrews it says it's what? Without faith or trusting Yahweh's word, it's impossible to please him. So if you believe or trust his word, then you do what he said do, right? I mean, if you say you believe this word, and then you don't do it, then you must be a liar. I think it says that in 1 John. Anybody that says, I know him, and doesn't do what his commandments say is a liar. The truth is not in him. Isn't that what it said? To execute judgment here, it says, though. And even the Torah that he gave the people, you know, he said, hey, your eyes are being opened right now. He's giving them the truth, you know. He's giving them all the instructions. Now, when he came, now here in Jude, he's talking about to execute judgment. This is talking about a future time, okay? If we go back to Deuteronomy now, he brought all these people out. And remember, he told the people, I'm fixing to bring you into the promised land, right? But his purpose was he was fixing to execute judgment on all those people that were in the land who hadn't done what he told them to do. And he told them, he said, I'm not bringing you in the land because of your righteousness. It's because of the promise that he made to Abraham. Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. But he's bringing the people out of Egypt, and he's going to bring judgment on those people, the Canaanites that were in the land. Go back to Exodus 12. In verse 12. Not only did he get judgment on all the people down in the land of Canaan, but he got judgment on all those in the land of Egypt. In verse 12 he says, For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am Yahweh. Bring judgment against those gods. Well, now there really are no other gods or creators, right? So what is the judgment that he's bringing? Because all the judgment that he brought actually came onto the people, right? But he said he's going to execute all the, judgment on the gods. Scriptures teach us that we become like what we worship. So all these so-called gods that these people were worshiping and all these plagues that he brought against those gods actually came on the people. But the gods couldn't help them, could they? But they became like what they worshiped. So all these plagues that came against the gods went on the people because that's, it was something that they had made up in their own mind. It wasn't real. Same thing happens today. When you begin to follow something else other than what Yahweh says, then when he brings judgment against that false god, says that's what you're believing in, and you become like what you worship, then that judgment comes on you. Okay? So if we want the judgment, you know, if we want to become like Yahweh, we believe in Him, right? Then whatever good comes to Him would come to us. It makes sense? I mean, it's the same pattern, isn't it? Okay. Go to Leviticus 18. And in Leviticus 18, verses 24 through 30. And we're going back and looking at some of these passages in the Torah that He gave them, because we're explaining what it says there in Deuteronomy about He brought this fiery law. And then He says in verse 24, do not defile yourself with any of the things, for by all these the nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you. For the land is defiled, therefore I visit the punishment of its iniquity upon it, and the land vomits out its inhabitants. He brought the punishment upon the land, right? And yet He said He was bringing, you know, judgment executed against all the gods, and yet all these things that He brought came on the people. I want us to see that it's very clear, whatever you worship, you know, whatever is designed to happen to what you're worshiping is going to come on you. Verse 26, you shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall not commit of these abominations, either any of your own nation or any stranger who sojourns among you. For all these abominations the men of the land have done who were before you, and thus the land is defiled. Thus the land vomit you out also when you defile it, as it vomited out the nations that were before you. For whoever commits any of these abominations, the persons who commit shall be cut off from among their people. Therefore you shall keep my ordinance, so that you do not commit any of these abominable customs which were committed before you, and that you do not defile yourselves by them. I am Yahweh Eloheka. Whatever people worship before Him, He's saying, you don't do. Whatever would bring judgment on those people, He said, you stay away from it, because you know it's going to come on you. That's why Paul can write whatever was written before was written for our learning, you know, as a teaching for us, right? So whatever bad came on people, what they did, to understand what's going to come on us if we do the same thing. We want the good or we want the bad. That's the biggest problem. Most people don't really have any idea. They want whatever they think is going to make them accepted in society, in the world, right? And yet who is the God of the world? Hasatan. Okay, go to Deuteronomy 9. See, we're going to work our way back to Deuteronomy 33. And there were 3, 4, and 5, verses 3, 4, and 5 of Deuteronomy 9. Therefore understand today that Yahweh Eloheka, He who goes over before you as a consuming fire, He will destroy them and bring them down before you. So you shall drive them out and destroy them quickly, as Yahweh has said to you. Yahweh is a consuming fire. He's the one that's going to destroy the enemies, right? Well, if all of a sudden those that He calls your enemies, you decide to join and become like them, then what's going to happen to you? If He's going to destroy anything that's an enemy of Him and His people, right? Well, if you become like that, what's going to happen to you? I mean, I'm asking the question in 2 or 3 different ways, but the same thing, isn't it? You're going to be destroyed same as they were. In verse 4 He says, do not think in your heart after Yahweh Eloheka has cast them out before you, saying, because of my righteousness Yahweh has brought me in to possess this land. He said, don't go thinking that you came in and possessed this land because you were so great, because He said, that's not why He did it. But it is because of the wickedness of these nations Yahweh is driving them out from before you. You know, all modern people can talk about is how mean the God of the Old Testament was, and how many people He killed, and all this kind of stuff. And yet they never get around to the point that the only reason He destroyed them is because they wouldn't obey His law. That's why He destroyed them in the first place. Well, what's He going to do to you if you don't keep His law?
Same thing.
If He's the same yesterday, today, and forever, the same thing going to happen. Verse 5 is, it is not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart that you go in to possess their land, but because of the wickedness of these nations that Yahweh Eloheka drives them out from before you, and that He may fulfill or accomplish the word which Yahweh swore to your fathers, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. And the promise that He made to them is why He's doing all of this. Anybody recognize then that giving them the Torah and bringing them into the land is part of the promise He made to Abraham? Book of Galatians says, if you accept Messiah Yehoshua, then you are the seed of Abraham and heirs to the promise. And whatever he promised Abraham comes to you. Galatians 3:29, right? And what he promised the seed was a covenant in the land. The covenant that he gave through Moses in the land is a promise that comes to us. And yet people today are saying, oh, we reject that covenant. We don't want it. Go back to Deuteronomy 33 there. Now again, he's talking about, just for a second, he's talking about a fiery law came from his hand. We see all this fiery stuff, okay? Go to Exodus 3. Well, there's a, just remember this fiery part. In verses 1 and 2. It said, now Moshe kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of Elohim. Now what was he? He was down in Midian, right? Taking care of the flocks. And he went to the back of the desert. Remember, he's in Midian. And he came to this mountain called Horeb on the back of the desert, and the angel of Yahweh appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. The angel in the midst of a flame of fire from the bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Then Moses said, I will now turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. Why wouldn't the bush burn? Why wouldn't the bush be consumed? Because he is what? Totally righteous. And the fire is not going to consume that who is totally righteous. Remember, the fire is to destroy those who are wicked, right? And what he saw in the bush was the totally righteous one, right? The angel of Yahweh appeared to him. Okay. Moses first saw him as a fiery thorn bush on the Mount of Horeb, on the backside of the desert. The word bush in that passage is the number 5572. Seneh. It means a bramble or a thorny bush. Back in Deuteronomy, if we put all these things together, from this revelation, from Moses seeing him in this fiery bush on the mountain, Yahweh rose up like the sun, bringing light to the people that he called to serve him and to walk in his light. From the bush, through Moses, to the people, he brought them out to serve him. That's never changed. The covenant that he gave through Moses is for all time to the seed of Abraham. That's never changed. I know there's a lot of people out there teaching different articles of time or different, what's the term that I'm looking for? Well, we had a period of time with the law and a period of time without the law, and now a time with the Messiah, now a time, different things, and he said, and a lot of them are teaching at different points in time, there's different things we have to live by. But the Torah is for all time.
Errol said this one.
Dispensation, yeah, under these dispensations and all this kind of stuff. You're under a dispensation of law and grace and all this time. These things are all man-made, none of them are Scripture. Okay. So he brought them out from Egypt, bondage, brought them to himself. He gave them instructions on how to live as a free people, and then brought them into the land of promise. But he also told them, if you don't believe, you're not going to go in. And a lot of them didn't believe, and they didn't enter the promised land. We all expect to enter the promised land one day, right? What happens if we don't believe? We don't go in either.
If we don't believe, we don't obey. So then comes.
And he said, depart from me, I never knew you, those who transgressed the law. Okay. In verse 2 there is still the word fiery law. Fire is 784. Ish is the word fire. The word law, 1881, da'at. It's like a decree or a commission. We were commissioned to do these other things. We're going to look up this word fiery there in verse 2. From his right hand a fiery law. Go to Genesis 15, verse 17. Yahweh made a promise to Abram. Then he put Abram to sleep after Abram, cut the animals and laid the pieces down on top of the mountain and everything. But then he put Abraham to sleep. And then in verse 17 it says, "And it came to pass, and the sun went down, it was dark. Behold, a smoking oven and a burning or a fiery torch that passed between those pieces." The promise was established by fire. The fiery torch walking in the blood, in the pieces, established the covenant that was a promise to Abraham. Even in Galatians it says, we are heirs of the promise. And see, this is the promise. Abraham couldn't keep it, right? What man can keep everything that Yahweh promises to the world? You can't. So he put Abraham to sleep, and who walked in the blood? Who was the one then that took the authority of keeping the covenant upon himself? Yahweh did. All the blessings that come to us are part of what he promised. Our part is to be obedient and do what he said to do so that those blessings will come upon us, because he's the one that established it. If you transgress, then the curses come, right? But if you obey, then the blessings come. They are inherent in the word, but he's the one that established it. In Exodus 13, in verse 21, it said that Yahweh went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. So the fiery law, the fiery instruction, the word of Yahweh is to give us light, to light the path, to show us how we're supposed to walk. Always was, always has been. The path that Yahweh wants us to walk has light shining on it by the Torah.
Lights our way.
It lights our way. It's a lamp under our feet. It's our path, okay? Any place we go, whether it's day or night, we know the path we're supposed to follow because it is being lit by the Torah of Yahweh. No matter where you go, the pathway is lit by his word. Well, he's turned it on. All we got to do is follow it. You get off the path, you get into darkness. Go to Exodus 24. In verse 17 and 18. In verse 17, the sight of the glory of Yahweh was like a consuming fire on the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. Moses first saw him as a bush, that burned, but it was not consumed. And yet here it says the sight of the glory of Yahweh was like a consuming fire on the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. So Moshe went into the midst of the cloud and went up into the mountain. He was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. He was in this consuming fire, and yet he wasn't consumed. The fire came down on top of the mountain, yet the mountain wasn't consumed. The fire was there. Okay? Go to Deuteronomy 4. In verse 24. For Yahweh Eloheka is a consuming fire, a jealous El. You ever thought about a jealous El? I mean, we think of jealousy as something that's bad, among mankind, but yet Yahweh is zealous or jealous for it. He knows all the good that's going to come to us if we obey what he said do. But the minute he sees us out following some other god, then he realizes the curse is going to come upon you, and he really hates for that to happen. And he's zealous for you to receive what he wants you to have. But he's not going to change your mind against your will. You have the choice. You can choose which way to walk. That's why he said, I set before you this day life and blessings, death and curses. You choose. We have that choice. Okay, go back. 33, verse 3 again. He loves the people. That word love, there is a number, I think it's 2245. Kabab. It means to hide in the bosom. It means to cherish. They sit down at your feet. Sit down. 8497, Tokah, means to encamp. Okay? 7272 is at your feet, regel. Literally, it means a foot. As a euphemism, we all know what euphemisms are. This phrase, at your feet, actually means, this regel means the organ of life. So you want to encamp at the organ of life. Who is that? That's him. Go to Luke 10. In verse 38 and 39. Well, actually 38 through 42. It said, now it happened as they went that he entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, or Miriam, who also sat at Yehoshua's feet and heard his word. She sat at Yehoshua's feet. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she approached him and said, Master, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore tell her to help me. Yehosha answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things. But one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that good part which will not be taken away from her. What he's saying, when you have chosen to sit at the feet of Yahweh, Yehoshua, okay, to learn, that's a good part you have chosen. And he said, it will not be taken from you. Okay? So they're receiving his word. I think it's interesting too. Everyone receives your words, and the word receive there is the number 5375. In the Hebrew, it's the word nasa, which means to lift up, or to carry, or to receive. Okay, I think it's interesting if we look at a word play. Okay,
Yeah.
down in the southern part of Texas, a little old place called, you know, the space station where they shoot rockets off. And what's it called? NASA. North American Space Administration, NASA. NASA means to lift up, or to carry up. Okay, to bear up. Kind of a wordplay. Go to Proverbs chapter 4. Verses 4 and 5. Now this is Proverbs of Solomon. In verse 4 he says, he also taught me and said to me, let your heart retain my words, keep my commands, and live. Verse 5, get wisdom, get understanding, do not forget nor turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forget and do not turn away from the words of my mouth. You realize how easy it is to get out there in the world and get away from Yahweh's words, and it doesn't take long and all of a sudden you forget what he's trying to tell you. The ways of the world will keep you from studying that. You're not going to stay with them as long as you're dealing with the world, because they don't want to hear it, don't care about it, don't understand if you say it, don't want to know it in the first place. If they did, they'd be with you studying. Go to look in verse 20 and 22. 20 through 22, this same Proverbs chapter 4. He said, my son, give attention to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them depart from your eyes. Keep them in the midst of your heart, for they are life to those who find them and health to all their flesh. It kind of implies that the life and everything is hidden in his word. And you have to search it out to find it. That's why he said, those who search for him with all their heart, mind, and soul, he said, I will be found of them. it's me saying this, we must understand and walk in His words in order to receive the blessings given in His words. We must understand in order to share in that blessing. He cares for all people. His divine laws were given to Israel, but we are supposed to be a light to all nations. Okay? It's unfortunate that most of those who received it didn't accept it, or else were deceived by something or somebody else and turned away from it. Back in Deuteronomy chapter 4 again, in verses 5 through 8, he writes in verse 5, he says, "Surely I have taught you statutes and judgments, just as Yahweh Elohim commanded me, that you should act accordingly in the land which you go to possess. Therefore be careful to observe, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples, who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people." How come more people today don't say that? Because most of the people in that nation are not walking according to Yahweh's word. If we look in the papers, on television, and everything today, most of the people that are leaders in the nation of Israel are trying to what? Fall in line with what the leaders of this country want. And my gosh, this country is not in that great a shape. Stop and think about it. Verse 7, "For what great nation that has Elohim so near to it as Yahweh Elohim is to us, for whatever we may call upon Him, and what great nation that has statutes and righteous judgments as are in all this Torah which I set before you this day." What other nation has ever been given the righteous judgments of Yahweh? What other nation has? And yet that nation didn't want them either. And it's obvious the nation we live in, and any other don't want them. You know, they're all trying to go about to try to establish their own ways. Look at all the TV programs. They're trying to come up with ways how to solve the problems of abuse. You know, abuse. You know, it's using something for something other than what it's intended for. If you don't know the use of something, you tend to abuse it. Okay, whether it's wife abuse, self abuse, child abuse, drug abuse, whatever it is, if you don't know the use of it, you abuse it. Whatever it is. How many people know what the word is supposed to be used for? How many people know that the word is supposed to be the guideline of the path we walk in order to have life and blessings? And even those of us who know that can be pulled away by people who are trying to walk according to something else. And they hold up something trying to make it look so good to you. You know, and it may look like a piece of candy. It might even taste good for a minute. But it's going to give you a stomachache, right? Okay. Just for a second, before we go back to 33, go to Ephesians chapter 4. In verse 12. Now, I'm not trying to take this verse out of context, because in verse 11 it says, "And He Himself gave some apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers." Now this writer of Ephesians, which we know that Paul was writing those in Ephesus, right? He's writing about what Yahweh has done. And he's writing to all the people about how that Yehoshua, you know, completed the things that was prophesied that he was going to do. But here in this verse he's saying, and He Himself, talking about Yahweh, gave apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. These had come ever since Moses. Verse 12, "For the equipping of the saints, for the work of ministry, for the edifying or building up of the body of the Mashiach." These have been in existence for a long time. From this passage today, well, from one of them, you know, they start trying to talk about building this so-called fivefold ministry, and that each person today is supposed to fit into one of those, you know, offices, right? The office of the prophet, or the office of this, or the office of that. Isn't it amazing that when Yahweh gave me, He didn't think of calling it a fivefold ministry. That had to be man-made. Yeah. He gave these people, but the whole purpose of it was to teach what? for the equipping of the saints, the set apart ones, for the work of ministry. It's not one person's job to go reach multitudes of people. It's one person's job to equip himself with the words and the truth of Yahweh so that you can reach one other person. And if each one of us reaches one, and he reaches one, and he reaches one, you guess what? The kingdom of Yahweh is going to be built, but it's going to happen without being observed. It's not going to be because somebody called a meeting at 7:30 on Thursday night. Okay, go back, verse 4. We got to hurry. I got to get through this before everybody goes to sleep. Verse 4, Moshe commanded the Torah for us, a heritage or a possession. That number is 4181 if you want to look it up. A possession of the congregation of Yaakov. Who does it belong to? Did he give it to anybody else? Did he take it away from them and give it to somebody? But you know that's what's being taught today. Oh, well, all that old stuff was just for the Jews, right? Moses commanded or commissioned to us a law, 8451 Torah. That word Torah, a lot of you may already know this, but it comes from the root number 3384. The root. And that word is Yah-Ra. Y-A-W-R-A-H would be a transliteration. Yah-Ra. It means to flow as water. It means to shoot an arrow. It means to point out, or to shoot out the finger as in pointing out. It also means to teach. So the Torah is what? Instructions for having life. Doctrines. The instructions of Torah will correct you if you're doing something wrong. The word inheritance, or heritage there, 4181, possession, the word itself is moroshah. Actually, literally, it means a possession. It is a possession of what? A possession of the congregation of Yaakov. Go to Romans chapter 9. Verses 3, 4, and 5. You know, this is one of those passages in the New Testament letters that confirms what the Torah says, but because it gets so distorted of unthinking, people never see it. But in verse 3, 4, and 5, Rav Shaul, the Apostle Paul, writes, "For I could wish that I myself were accursed from the Mashiach, for my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh, who are Israelites." His brethren are who? Israelites, to whom the word pertain is added in there, but it means, you know, to whom belongs the adoption, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the Torah, the service of El, and the promises. Now wait a minute. I thought people today run around saying all that old stuff belongs to the Jews, but we got this new stuff. Well, this new stuff Paul talking about still belongs to who? Belongs to the Israelites, right? Isn't that what he says? Again, go back to Ephesians in chapter 2. Verse 11 and 12. Now remember, this is Paul writing to the saints, or the called out ones, who are in Ephesus and faithful in the Mashiach. In verse 11 and 12 of Ephesians chapter 2, he says, "Therefore remember that you, once Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision made in the flesh by hands." You Gentiles, remember he was out there and he was trying to reach the lost sheep of the house of Israel scattered among the nations of the world. You, called uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision made in the flesh by him, that at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel. Remember, if you're a Gentile, that means you're without Mashiach, right? And a lot of people today would like to say, oh, well, I'm a Gentile believer. I mean, talking about oxymorons. At that time, you were without the Mashiach, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without ill in the world. If you're outside the family, if you're outside the camp, if you're outside of what he gave, then you are without all those things, right? In order to partake of it, you have to go where it is. And where is it? Where was it given? Who was it given to? The children of Israel. That's why Ruth, you know, your people shall be my people and your El my El. And took upon herself the covenant that was given to those people. Going back into Deuteronomy 33, we'll go on into verse 5. And he was king in Yeshurun, when the leaders of the people were gathered, all the tribes of Israel together. Yeshurun, or Jeshurun, there with a J, it actually has a Y in it. The number is 3484. The word itself means the upright. And it's a symbolic name for Israel. Talking about king in Yeshurun, he's really saying he was king among all those who are upright of the children of Israel. Because there are a lot of them that weren't. A lot of them were destroyed. Same thing today. And it's still true today. He is the king among Yeshurun, those who are upright. Now, my personal opinion is when people talk about the book of Yasher, you know, everybody heard people talk about the book of Yasher because somebody put a capital Y on it in the text. But the word Yasher means what? The upright. You're talking about the book of the upright. Where do you find stories about the upright? In the book of the upright, in the Torah. The Kings and the Chronicles and all those are the books of the upright. In verse 6 he said, now, and he's beginning to speak about the different tribes. Let Reuben live and not die. Now, most English Bibles have, nor let his men be few. But the word nor is not in the text. So actually what that says is, let Reuben live and not die, but let his men be few. Reuben and his descendants in the tribe of Reuben never did become very predominant in anything, because what? He lost the right of the firstborn. When Reuben went up and slept with his father's concubine, he gave up everything. It's amazing how fleshly appetites people have can cost them life. Remember, the word Reuben 7205 means see a son, and let his men be few. Go to Genesis 49. Remember, these are the words that are being spoken about the various and sundry tribes by Moses. In Genesis 49, we have words spoken about the tribes for the end time, spoken by Yaakov. In chapter 49, in verses 3 and 4, well, let's go back up to verse 1 just to get the context. Jacob called his sons and said, gather together that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. He didn't say, gather together and I'm going to bless you. He said, gather together, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to you in the latter day. Okay? So that's what he said. And in here in verse 3 and 4, he said, Reuben, you're my firstborn, my might, the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Unstable as water, you shall not excel. Because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. So he said, you're not going to excel. Actually, that word there, excel, 3498, means you shall not abound in any form. So then when you compare that back to verse 6, and it makes sense, then let his men be few. Because Moses is right in line with the same thing that Yaakov said. Reuben is not going to excel in anything. Let his men be few. If you stop and think about it now, everybody would like to be a member of some particular tribe of Israel, right? You have to be careful which tribe you want to be a member of. Verse 7, and this he said of Judah. Hear Yahweh the voice of Judah, and bring him to his people. Let his hands be sufficient for him, and may you be a help against his enemies. That's pretty good. He's saying Yahweh will always hear the voice of Judah. Judah will come. He will, be there for his people. Let his hand be sufficient for him. Wherever he sets his hand to do is going to prosper, and may you be a help against his enemies. We all know what he said. Go back to Genesis 49 and verses 8 through 12, and that gives you all the things that he said about Judah. Verse 8, Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. He's the offspring of a lion. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down. He lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? You ever thought about going and walking up in the pride of lions, about 10 or 12 in a bunch, and find a big old male there and there asleep in the middle of them, and slap him on the back of the head and say, get up? I mean, that's kind of a strange picture, isn't it? Right? Verse 10, he says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes. Remember, the word Shiloh means him to whom it belongs. So the scepter shall not depart from Judah until he comes to whom it belongs. And who was that came? Yehoshua, of the tribe of Judah, the one who is slated to be king of Israel. And by the way, if all of this stuff is just for Israel, remember Yehoshua is supposed to be the king of Israel. Right? Okay, go back to Deuteronomy 33. Verse 8, and of Levi he said, your Tumim and your Urim, your Holy One. You notice the words let, not there, be is not there, and with is not there. All those words that are put in it by the translators is the way they understand it. But actually what it just says, your Tumim and your Urim, your Holy One. So what is the Tumim and Urim? What does it mean? Urim is lights and Tumim means perfection, right? Mm-hmm. Well, these two stones, the lights and perfection was what was in the breast pocket. And those two stones were what the priest, looked to give them answers of what they should do. Lights and perfection. Well, who is the only perfect light? Messiah Yehoshua is the light of the world, right? So your Tumim and your Urim, your Holy One, whom you tested at Massah, and with whom you contended at the waters of Meribah. See, even Levi had some problems. And remember, it was Levi and Simeon who went in, and did all the things that they did at Shechem. And then they were cursed. And then because, things that happened later on, that curse got changed. But in verse 9 he says, who says of his father and mother, I have not seen them? Nor did he acknowledge his brothers or know his own children. For they have observed your word and kept your covenant. They shall teach Yaakov your judgment and Yisrael your Torah. Well, he's still saying the Levites are the ones who are going to be teaching. And who are they going to be teaching? The children of Israel. They shall put incense before you and a whole burnt sacrifice on your altar. Bless his substance, Yahweh, and accept the work of his hands. Strike the loins of those who rise against him, and of those who hate him, that they rise not again. Strike the loins, okay, of those who rise against him. Isn't that saying that those who come against you are not going to have any offspring, so that they can continue to build against him? That's a pretty strong statement, isn't it? Go to Exodus 32.
Where are we going?
Exodus 32. In Exodus chapter 32,